Demonic possession is rare. So rare, in fact, that these are the words of a man who dedicated 4 decades of his life to battling demons and other paranormal entities. Canon William H. Lendrum was a well-respected Anglican priest from Belfast who specialised in ministering to those troubled by the paranormal. Over the course of his ministry, he imparted countless blessings, confronted poltergeists, drove away earthbound spirits, and performed exorcisms in order to deliver demoniacs. These latter instances were described by Lendrum during an interview with authors David M. Keeley and Christina McKenna as the exception rather than the rule. In most cases of paranormal disturbance, a lesser cause and thus a lesser solution was the outcome. The story of Heather Mitchelson was an exception. Plagued by darkness her entire life, it was in the winter of 1992 that activity escalated. Strange phenomena arrived at Heather's home, as well as voices that told her to do unspeakable things. Fleeing the property did not resolve the issue. The activity followed her, with Heather's very body ultimately succumbing to demonic influence. Her voice is said to have changed, as well as her face, her language, and her demeanour. By the time Canon Lendrum became involved, he concluded that she was fully possessed by multiple preternatural entities. Again, her story was an exception rather than the rule. And unlike others I have covered on this channel, not all stories of demonic possession and exorcism find a happy ending. And so, in the dark and tragic case of Heather Mitchelson, viewer discretion is advised. My name is Laura, and you are watching The Paranormal Scholar. From the moment of her birth, Heather's life had been surrounded by evil. Her father was violently abusive. Her mother, traumatized, was sporadically absent for her formative early years. Even when things seemed to change for the better after the sudden death of her father and restoration of her mother to her life, Heather's situation didn't improve. Rather, she acquired a new dark influence in her life, a stepdad who, in many ways, was even worse than her blood father. The abuse he committed against her was utterly unspeakable. And according to Canon Lendrum's retelling of the case in The Dark Sacrament, a 2007 book by authors David M. Keeley and Christina McKenna, was actually permitted and approved of by Heather's mother. The one person who seemed to have exerted any sort of positive influence on a young Heather was her maternal grandmother, affectionately known as Nan Sell. Heather and her brother spent 5 years living with her whilst her mother was away working in England. A strong bond was formed between granddaughter and grandmother, so much so that even 14 years after her death in 1978, Heather was at first pleased to see her Nan Sell again when she appeared as a ghostly figure at the end of her bed at 3 a.m. in late February 1992. Her initial gladness at seeing her grandmother, however, soon dissipated. Confronted by the spectral anomaly, Heather asked aloud, "What do you want?" She was surprised to receive an answer. Dressed in a pale blue nightgown, the spirit of the older woman responded in a chilling voice, "Heather, soon you'll be with me." After this, the spirit supposedly raised its hands to its throat and made strangling motions. Undoubtedly, Heather was terrified. Despite having endured a tragic start to life, she had for the past 2 years been living happily with a kind and loving man called Joe. She was settled and peaceful and did not want anything to jeopardize that. And yet, after she called her mother, frantically needing to share the story of her spectral grandmother, she began to spiral. Her mother was cold and ridiculed her experience, despite confirming that Nan Sell had indeed been buried in a pale blue nightgown, something which Heather, only being 10 years old at the time of her grandmother's passing, had not known. And so, alone at home, with Joe away working the night shift, Heather's thoughts quickly darkened. Previously, she had made 2 attempts to end her life. Her mind returned there now. But more than that, she was encouraged by something that seemed to exist outside of her. A voice, a man's voice. It was coming from somewhere down the hall and instructed her in horrific detail to go to the bathroom and take unspeakable action. She was certain that the voice was that of her abusive stepfather, who she had called Uncle Seth. The more it spoke to her, the more hypnotic it became. An eerie sense of calm is said to have enveloped her entire body. Fortunately, before she was able to do anything, another voice, that of a different man, roused her. It was her boyfriend, Joe, returned from work. Later, Joe confessed to Canon Lendrum that he had been petrified at that moment. He had never seen Heather like that before. Her eyes were wide and staring. She seemed in some kind of trance. Indeed, at first Heather had not even recognized him. In the end, a gentle touch on the arm and soft, persistent calling of her name had restored her awareness. Despite the intensity of the situation, both Heather and Joe, once calmed down, had dismissed the incident as an anomaly, brought on by stress, sleep disturbance, a bad dream, or something similar. And yet, this was only the beginning of the unsettling activity. Soon the couple began to experience what can only be described as poltergeist activity. They would hear movement in their bedroom when they were downstairs watching television together. Their dog, a young German shepherd, seemed to sense the unseeable, being wary of certain parts of the house and, as time passed, even Heather. On one occasion, when Joe went upstairs to investigate a strange series of thuds coming from the bedroom, he was confronted by a foul odor, that of stale urine and bad drains. With time, the same bad smells seemed to follow Heather, despite her having always prided herself on her personal hygiene. And so, far from it just being Heather, Joe also experienced paranormal manifestations. Indeed, one night when the couple fled the house in fear after increasingly aggressive bangs were heard coming from their bedroom, Joe claimed to have seen a figure standing just beyond the open drapes of the window. Not only that, he distinctly remembered opening the window earlier in the evening. By the time he saw the figure, it was closed. My blood ran cold, Joe later explained. Somebody had shut it. Even though the couple spent several days away from the house, staying with Joe's aunt, the activity did not stop. In fact, it got worse. Heather experienced strange bouts of disassociation. She would appear silent and far off. This quickly evolved to even more unsettling instances when Heather was not at all herself. During one particularly frightening episode, she even attempted to crash the car as Joe was driving. It was the 6th of March, 1992. Whilst downstairs at home together, the couple's dog had alerted them to the presence of an invisible intruder. What followed was both Heather and Joe allegedly witnessing the apparition of an older woman in the corner of the room. It was, so Heather claimed, undoubtedly her nan's cell. She was wearing the same blue nightgown as before. The spectre was also grinning. According to Canon Lendrum's description of the case, it seemed utterly malevolent. Not only that, similar to the apparition's first appearance, the figure raised its hand to its throat. Only this time, as the spectre began to choke itself, Heather, seated on the sofa next to Joe, also started to choke. Inexplicably, so the testimony claims, her shoulders were shaking and she was gurgling. Horrifyingly, as Joe rushed to help his stricken girlfriend, he noticed a hand fastened around her throat. It did not belong to the young woman. Instead, it was aged and wizened, as though it belonged to the old woman who had only moments ago materialized in the room. Indeed, according to Joe, there was even a spectral blue cuff at the wrist, the same as Nan Sell's nightgown. With tremendous effort, Joe was able to liberate Heather from the unearthly attack by seizing the grisly ghostly hand and commanding it to go. Heather was shaken and breathless. Joe immediately told her that they needed to leave. As they got up to go, they allegedly heard the sound of footsteps overhead, followed by their bedroom door opening. Then, when they tried to leave through the front door, they could not. It was stuck. Strangely, the lock would not move. In the end, the couple had to force their way from the house via a downstairs window. On the car journey to Joe's aunt's house, Heather is said to have been overcome by a malevolent force once again. This time, rather than being choked, she dove across the car and latched onto the steering wheel, violently wresting control of the car away from Joe. Mad with superhuman strength, the young woman was forcing the car on a collision course. It was only when, by chance, Joe invoked the name of Jesus Christ, shouting, "Jesus Christ, Heather, stop it," that the possessed woman released the wheel. When she next spoke, she did so in a voice that was not her own. Aggressive and cussing, it first laughed mockingly before going on to insult Joe's aunt. Bizarrely, the voice even described what Joe's aunt was doing at that very moment, information that was not known to either Joe or Heather. All the while, Heather is said to have had a wide, ugly grin, the rest of her face immobile, forehead and cheeks drawn taut, eyes wide open and staring. She had tried to end them. It was utterly unnatural. Joe was horrified. When eventually Heather returned to normal, she had no recollection of the incident. Undoubtedly, the malevolent activity was centered on Heather. In addition to the different voices, foul odors, and their dog's changed behavior around her, she would wake in the night startled and screaming after feeling spectral hands touching her. In the end, Heather confided in a doctor, concerned that her mental health struggles from the past were resurfacing. Incredibly, despite being a man of science, the doctor is said to have advised her something few medical practitioners would even consider. He recommended that Heather go and see a Christian minister. And so it was that Heather Mitchelson met Canon William H. Lendrum. The couple travelled 80 miles to Belfast to meet the elderly exorcist in his home. Straight away, the canon knew that this was not a simple case of an earthbound spirit terrorizing the couple. It was far worse. It was demonic. Aided by 2 assistants, Lendrum had immediately moved to perform a major exorcism on the young woman. After administering the Eucharist, the malevolent controlling force is said to have revealed its presence. Heather was, according to Lendrum's testimony, hideously transformed. Her neck had become impossibly elongated, the facial skin had tightened, and the lips were drawn back into a mocking smirk. As for the young woman's eyes, they were not her own. Instead, they fixed on the exorcist with blazing hatred. Once Lendrum announced to the others present that there was a demon in the room, the young woman launched herself at Joe. Further religious provocation by Lendrum, including commanding the foul and evil spirit to leave in the name of Jesus Christ, resulted in a voice growling out from the young woman's throat. Chillingly, it declared, "You'll never get rid of me. She's mine. She never belonged to him. She's ours. Before the sperm met the egg, she was ours." All the while, so Canon Lendrum recalled several years later, the young woman slithered off the sofa onto the floor. Cackling and taunting, her body was writhing strangely. Her movements were unnatural and yet entirely in keeping with the behaviors allegedly exhibited by other demonically possessed individuals all throughout place and time. As the religious provocation of the exorcism continued, the woman became increasingly hostile towards Lendrum and his assistants. Indeed, at one point, she is even described as constraining the 68-year-old exorcist in a body lock. According to Lendrum, despite being barely 5 feet tall, her arms and fists seemed to belong to a strongly built man. Dramatically, she repeatedly punched the exorcist in the jaw. Meanwhile, Lendrum's 2 assistants tried and failed to pull her off him. Heather simply shrugged the men away, boasting the easy strength of a freestyle wrestler as she knocked them to the floor. In the end, it was the power of Christ alone that is said to have stopped the inhuman strength that possessed the young woman. With the words, "In the name of Jesus, stop," she fell to the floor as if struck by a heavy object. From there, Canon Lendrum was able to continue the exorcism, praying over the young woman, commanding whatever foul entities possessed her to reveal themselves and depart. As this happened, Heather's body contorted, with the 2 assistants now restraining her to protect both herself and the others in the room. Horrifically, as Lendrum continued his work, the voice that came from the young woman's mouth is said to have changed. Sometimes it was that of an elderly woman. At other times, it was masculine and sneering. Abhorrently, at one point the voice even declared, "I am Uncle Seth. lover of the little ones, robber of the little souls, killer of the innocents. The voice, now roaring, stated that it would never leave her and that they would lead her to lose her life. After a great deal of effort, with Jesus continuing to be invoked, Canon Lendrum described facilitating the deliverance of the young woman. Her partner, Joe, described a lifting sensation in the room when it happened, as if a presence had departed. Heather had fainted. When consciousness returned, she had no recollection of anything that had happened. And yet, tragically, this is not the end of Heather's story. That was to come a mere 6 months later. As is often the case in similar instances of alleged demonic possession, Heather relapsed and the dark voices and unnatural activity returned. Oftentimes when this is so, the demoniac is described as returning to the exorcist, with further rounds of exorcism being administered. This was not the case for Heather Mitchelson. Talking some 15 years later to authors David M. Keeley and Christina McKenna, Canon Lendrum revealed that Heather, a necessary pseudonym for this tragic young woman, had taken her own life. Despite Lendrum having visited Heather several times after the exorcism, she had ultimately succumbed to the darkness of her past, both spiritual and material. She was found in her bedroom, the ceiling light fitting her chosen method of exit, her end thus a chilling mirror to the spectre who had taunted her with a choking hand around the throat. Lendrum did not believe that the spectre was her Nan's cell. Evil spirits can masquerade as the dead, he explained solemnly during his interview. There is, so he continued, the distinct possibility that the uncle and the grandmother were both demonized in their lifetimes. Her traumatic history, in which young Heather had been so badly failed by the adults in her life, had tragically exposed her to evil. There was, in short, no defense against it. Dark doorways had been created, and so, Canon Lendrum explained, having to cope with this day after day, week after week, year after year, had a terrible and lasting effect. He called it psychic stress, adding that Satan's bid for our souls is predicated on the debasement of our humanness as early as possible in our childhood. According to this worldview, there is no line to draw between phenomena which are rooted in the paranormal and phenomena which are rooted in mental health crises. They are not mutually exclusive, but rather feed each other. Undoubtedly, Heather was impacted and influenced by the trauma of her childhood. Could it be that rather than explain away the alleged paranormal activity that was witnessed by independent third parties such as Canon Lendrum, it instead opened gateways to the demonic realm? It is therefore a valid and necessary conclusion that children above all ought to be protected from evil of every variety, a statement which ought to be so obvious, natural and straightforward that it need not be said. But sadly, in the world of preternatural darkness in which we find ourselves, it is perhaps more necessary to assert than ever before. Thank you so much for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe for more of the paranormal. Interaction really helps our content reach more people and lets us know that you enjoy our work and want to see more. Thank you so much for being here. Stay kind and stay curious. Until next time.